My oldest gaming experience comes from Super Nintendo's Aladdin. It was like a precursor to Assassin's Creed. A lot of acrobats, platforming, super fun, very satisfying soundtrack. It was amazing. And since then, things have changed in gaming. Tons of things. Everything has changed. And of course, I'm nostalgic for those old days and those old games and those old experiences I had with gaming. But I've seen a ton of videos in the past year, maybe 2 years, complaining about the current state of gaming and saying how modern gaming is, and while I can't defend everything in modern gaming, I feel like looking at those horrible things is just a small part of the picture. I'm gonna do my best to take a fair look at modern gaming, but compared to the other videos I've seen, it's actually gonna come off like I'm defending modern gaming. So, let's defend modern gaming. First thing I need to do is address a few things that I hear very constantly about modern gaming that I think are bollocks, things that I don't think make sense as reasons that modern gaming are bad. The first thing I want to address is that modern gaming is a chore. I assume that this comes from the rise of dailies. I'm not saying that gaming isn't a chore. I'm saying that gaming has always had elements that are chore-like. I've done dailies before. I mean, some are better than others. Some are absolute trash. But they're really just like mechanics of the game. And if the daily makes the game worse and the game is not worth playing because the dailies are so strenuous, don't play that game. And I know that's not a solution, but I mean, this has like always existed. I can't tell you how many hours I spent dodging lightning bolts in the thunder plains of Final Fantasy X. I mean, like, I played thousands of games of Blitzball. I played hundreds and hundreds of hours of that game, Final Fantasy X. Just so I could get the ultimate weapons to do what? To beat the final boss? I already beat the final boss. If you can respect that, if you can respect putting hundreds of hours into single-player video games for nonsense ultimate weapons, like the video. Thank you. That kind of thing has always existed in games, at least for me. I've always participated in the quote-unquote chores of video games if I felt that like it was worth it. For example, getting the ultimate weapons in Final Fantasy games, getting the ultimate weapons in Kingdom Hearts games, really just getting ultimate weapons in JRPGs was like my chores. My friends, they grinded their way to level 16 Call of Duty. There's a million examples of things that existed before dailies and before weeklies that were chore-like things in video games. And ultimately, I do understand that dailies can cause some kind of anxiety for people, and some people do get hooked into dailies and it makes it a real slog to play games. I guess what I'm saying is that ultimately for me, in my experience, dailies have never made me play a game that I didn't want to play. The second big thing I want to address, and I want to make sure that everyone knows that this is the context that I've seen. When people complain about modern gaming, they're complaining specifically about AAA gaming. And I'm not going to be here saying like, oh, well then just play indie games, because that's the easy way out. We should avoid using AAA as a category in general, because it means nothing. AAA tends to mean the highest budget of games that are currently in existence. AAA games from the early 2000s would be the size of indie games today, not only in budget, but also in development staff. And if it's not the same thing, then why are we comparing those two things? It's apples and oranges. A AAA game in 2024 is not the same as a AAA game in 2001. So we can agree that Halo Infinite is a AAA game of this modern era, right? Would we be able to agree that Halo 1 was a AAA game of its era? Because by estimates, Halo 1 had about 40 people developing that game, which there's no like look into Halo Infinite. You can't really like find the exact dev numbers or budget for that game. More than 40 people developed that game. Let's be real. So pretty much the crux of my defense of modern gaming is not that AAA games are as good as they were in the past. It's that category is a new category of games. And I think that specific category, since it's new, has, pros, but also huge cons that people have never experienced in the past. And I think the category we can put these quote-unquote new AAA games in, ultra budget games. Games that require millions, literally millions of sales in order to break even. So I'm going to talk about some of those issues that come with these ultra budget games, but I also want to argue after that everything we loved in gaming prior still exists in gaming today. Okay, so let's talk about some of the pros of these ultra budget games. And some of you might be saying, there are no pros to the ultra budget games. When I was a kid, I couldn't have even imagined Elden Ring. I remember playing games like Zelda and being like, oh, what if this was just slightly more realistic? I remember playing Final Fantasy X and seeing the cutscenes and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't think games can get more realistic than this. Since then, I've played Horizon Zero Dawn, Elden Ring, and some games that have blown my mind. And these things wouldn't be possible without huge, giant budgets. Thick, fat budgets. If they could do that with no budget and they didn't need to sell a billion copies and they could still make super great graphics, great. Is it worth it? That's an argument. Pro number 2 is that they've released games with playability that is cutting edge in technology. So I'm talking about VR and the ability to play games in ways that we've never been able to play before. And these are the 2 pros. And do they outweigh the cons? Most people would argue no, and I think that that's probably where the disdain for this specific category of game is coming from. So let's talk a little bit about the cons of the ultra budget game. And I think that these are really the cons, the things that people are talking about when they say modern gaming sucks. Very small part of the picture, but we have to talk about it and we have to address it. So con number 1 is microtransactions. I think people are generally fine with microtransactions as long as they don't overstep, as long as they're not pay to win games. If you're paying for, a hat in your game or a new cosmetic and doesn't give you any benefit or advantage over other players, then sell the hat. What do I care? I personally don't know that I've ever even participated in microtransactions. So for me, and I did a little poll of the YouTube community, and very, very few people, I think something like 4% of people said that microtransactions was the biggest issue with modern gaming. So I don't think it's a big deal, at least not all the time. Predatory monetization is a big deal, but in most cases, microtransactions are a fine addition to the game if it's what a studio needs to do to afford to make the game. Issue number 2 with these ultra budget games, it makes studios that produce them risk averse. We've all seen this and we know there's less creativity in these specific games. Some people feel that they're just cookie cutter repeats of the same IPs over and over again. And that's because people are more likely to buy the same IPs over and over again. I mean, look at Madden, for example. Madden 23 or Madden 24 or Madden 25, they're all the same game as Madden 2012. I used to play Madden in college with my friends all the time. I hadn't played Madden since college, so the last Madden I played was probably Madden 2014. A year ago, I got Madden 2023 or something. Boy, oh boy, did it feel worse than Madden 2014. It was almost the exact same game, just slightly worse. Can't really afford to make something new or add things or change things. It's the same with Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed and giant companies that are making these safe games. This also is the same thing with remakes as well. So there's a lot of remakes coming out right now. And me personally, I like remakes. I like the Final Fantasy remakes. I've liked the Resident Evil remakes, Dead Space, the Spyro and Crash remakes. I'm actually enjoying this whole remake era. I think that it could definitely go wrong, but right now I like it. Let me know if I'm alone in that. I don't know if I'm the only person that likes these remakes, but I like them. I mean, if I am alone, then I guess that makes video game remakes like a guilty pleasure. Because I do. I like them. I've liked Spyro. It was fun. Final Fantasy, it's weird. It's different. But I like it. But it could be an issue in the future. Now, con number 3 is a little bit more heated. And that's live service games. A live service game is a little bit confusing, and I think that people can have different definitions of what a live service game is. It typically is an online multiplayer game that evolves as time goes on, and they're typically free to play. Of course, they're not always. And they're typically built around the idea of the game constantly evolving as time goes on. But there are a ton of issues with live service games, and a lot of people hate them, as I've seen from my poll. And the thing is, I think that the idea of live service games is not such a bad thing. If a live service game wasn't built on a budget of $100-200 million, the practices for monetization wouldn't need to be so aggressive. They wouldn't need to be so predatory. And so when I think about examples that aren't, I guess, considered live service games that have evolved though over time through several updates that people generally love, I think about Stardew Valley or about No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky started and people generally didn't like it, but through several evolutions and several updates, It's got a huge and vibrant player base even still. I guess it's not technically considered a live service game, but it functions pretty similarly, I guess, without predatory monetization practices. Same with Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley is an example of a game that was published one way and has received constant updates for years, and every DLC has been free, and they always will be. That's just kind of the way that Stardew Valley is. And so in ways, you could think of Stardew Valley as a living game that constantly evolves over time, but again, doesn't have these predatory monetization practices. So what I'm saying is live service games inherently aren't bad. There are beloved games that could be considered live service by some definition. The issue that we have with live service games, ultra budget live service games, they almost need to apply these predatory monetization tactics in order to make money, because if they don't, then they can't make the game. But then it's like, don't make the game, right? It seems crazy to me. Another example is pirate game, not Sea of Thieves. I was really looking forward to it, but then it sucked. What is it called? Black Sails. Let me look it up. 1 second. Skull and Bones. Okay. Skull and Bones is an example of a live service game that ultimately disappointed 90% of people. First, you pay $70 and you get a game that you now have to wait 4 seasons for. And you will have to pay more money to participate in battle passes and things like that. Unforgivable. So anyway, live service games, especially in this category of games that is ultra budget, it's not great. It's bad, actually. It's live service games. That's con number 3, I think. Anyway, the highest voted con of the ultra budget game was, by kind of a large margin, games being released unfinished. Now, this was something I tried to look into, and I couldn't really find any hard statistics, because what the definition of an unfinished game is pretty loose at best. But there are some games that are released to pretty much universal disgust that are completely trash, buggy messes when they're released. The example that every person that's been alive for the past 5 years thinks of is Cyberpunk. It was practically unplayable. So many people telling me
Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be the best game of all time.
People told me that. The hype was unreal for Cyberpunk 2077. And then it came out, and then there was a bit of copium here and there, but mostly people were shitting on it. And here's the thing about the unfinished game. I don't mind a first day patch as long as the game is playable when you release it, as long as there aren't glaring issues. If you were to look back at games that came out in the 2000s, in the 90s, whenever you want to say is the era before modern gaming, if those games could patch first day, they would patch first day. People are backwards hopping through stairs to the final boss in Mario 64. So it's not like games in the past were released without bugs. So first day patches, it's whatever, as long as the game is released in a condition that is enjoyable for the player. But there is a huge wave of games in these giant releases that are released with the promise that they will eventually be playable. They just don't tell you that until 2 weeks after they release it. And that, my friends, is not okay. That's a problem. That's an issue. Everyone hates it. There's no defending it. I can't defend modern gaming for this releasing unfinished games at all. It's a trend that should stop today. Big company executives will watch this video. They'll apologize to me in the comments, and they'll stop doing it. So you're welcome, everyone. But I want to get away from the ultra budget games, because I feel like every video about modern gaming is exclusively about ultra budget games. The giant saving grace, the reason that modern gaming is amazing for me, and this is where the big defense comes in. Currently, there are more games released than ever before, and there are more variety of games by different kinds of developers, different sizes, and so we aren't limited to only what a big studio can produce. It seems like more and more there's a democratization of game development itself. And I mean, you can check Steam for like how many indie games have come out in the past 3 years compared to, early 2010s, even late 2010s. I'm sure between 2016 to 2020 versus 2020 to 2024, there's a huge difference in how many indie games have been released. But I'm not just talking about indie games. I hate the box that you have to put games in to call them indie. What is an indie game? How many developers? What I'm saying is, like, even just a couple years ago, playing indie games was for like hipster gamers or extreme gamers or like gaming YouTubers or whatever. But what we've seen in the past like 2 years maybe is that some of the biggest games of the year are no longer these giant ultra budget games. Some of the biggest games of the year this year have been Palworld, Balatro, Helldivers 2, Hades 2, Nightingale, Lethal Company. These games have been huge even amongst, your average gamer. And these aren't huge budget games. I mean, Helldivers 2 is pretty big budget, but besides that, these aren't giant ultra budget games, moderate sized games. They're games that we could compare to some of the big games from the past, some of the big games from the golden age of gaming, or whatever you want to say, whatever your favorite era of gaming is. Those games exist today. You don't have to play these giant budget games. And not only that, it's now even cool to play the smaller budget games. Everybody was playing Palworld. Everybody was playing Palworld. And they weren't playing it because it was a hipster cute thing. They were playing it because Palworld rules, my man. Palworld rules. And there's still games coming out that I'm looking forward to that are small games. I mean, Squirrel with a Gun. Have you seen the trailers for that? If you haven't seen the trailers for Squirrel with a Gun, check them out. It looks dumb, and it looks fun, and it looks like exactly what I want to play when it comes out. I think it is a disservice to the developers of these smaller games, these amazing games that we're all currently enjoying, to say that modern games suck because you don't want to play the new Assassin's Creed. What about all the people that are spending years to develop their game? The one guy that developed Balatro, the people that developed Palworld, these smaller games that everyone loves. Let's not just ignore them because they're not $300 million budgets. And the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to modern gaming is a fairly new part of gaming that didn't exist as much in the early 2000s, and that is gamer loyalty. When you have these giant gaming companies like Bethesda, Ubisoft, EA, whatever, when you have these giant corporations that are making games, these corporations existed in the past, but now they have such a library that they have fans that have been playing only their games or mainly their games for their whole lives. And so you have, adults and teenagers that are playing Madden NFL 2023 because they've always played Madden, or they're buying the new Assassin's Creed because they've always played Assassin's Creed, or they've always played Halo or Call of Duty. Whereas in the early 2000s, yeah, there was Mario. Yeah, there was Pokemon was starting to get there, Yeah, there was Square Enix with Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and things like that. But now, 20 years later, some of these franchises and some of these corporations are so much bigger, and they have so much more loyalty amongst fan bases. And loyalty is mostly a good thing in regular life, is not a good thing when it comes to making your buying decisions. I'm not going to say what percentage of the ultra budget games is enabled by gamer loyalty, but it's got to be some percentage. And that's something we have a control over. That's something we can stop doing. We don't have to just buy a game because we bought the last one. Or we shouldn't just feel loyal to Bethesda and buy whatever Bethesda game because we loved, Skyrim and Elder Scrolls and Fallout and whatever games they had in the past. We should start judging games on the game that's coming out. And I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of this, because I am. Maybe not for a specific franchise, but I've always considered myself a PlayStation guy because I played Final Fantasy growing up. And I have recently been I need to stop just being a PlayStation guy. What's wrong with the Xbox? I mean, I'm not going to say what's wrong with the Xbox, because, what games they got. But what I should say is that there are things wrong with PlayStation. There are things wrong with Xbox. There's things wrong with Bethesda and Square Enix and EA especially, and Ubisoft especially. And there are things wrong with all these companies and things wrong with all these franchises. And we should really be making decisions based on the merit of a specific game, not because we're loyal to any one franchise or company. There is so much nostalgia that I have for the past. I have enjoyed games in the past in ways that I have not been able to enjoy games recently. At some point I did attribute it to games changing. I did think, okay, it's not me, it's the industry. The industry's changing, and that's why I'm not enjoying gaming as much. But after actually taking a look at it, the industry is changing, but it's not worse, and it's not preventing me from enjoying games like I used to. And so I have recently been trying to enjoy games like I used to, playing games in ways that I used to play them. And I'm not going to get more into that because I'm in the process of making a video about how to enjoy games the way that we did when we were kids. So, you know, if you're interested in that, and that video is made, then the link will be up there somewhere. You can watch that. I have realized that modern gaming is not worse. There are issues. There are growing pains, just like there's going to be with any industry. As gamers, we just have to adapt with it. We have to not be so loyal. We have to, you know, avoid these ultra budget games if we don't like to see them. Start looking for, you know, smaller games that are closer to the size of the games we used to enjoy. Besides that, keep playing games. I'm Terrence. I'm going to keep playing games till I find the perfect one. Peace, love,